School is in. But are you really ready to learn? Open your eyes to a new day in education with the Awakening Educator, a program specifically designed to explore a new, mindful way of educating our youth. Learn about social-emotional learning, new modalities of teaching, and the most relevant topics in education with your hosts, Susan Andrian and Megan Sweet. Susan and Megan will take you inside the issues by looking at them from different points of view, from policies and research to teaching models that are actually used in schools. There's never a dull moment in this classroom. Have any questions you'd like to ask? Maybe you have knowledge you'd like to share. And share your thoughts live on air. Grab a pen and paper and get ready to open your textbooks and minds to a new way of learning on the Awakening Educator.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Awakening Educator today. I am with Anashay Wright from Disruptive Partners, and she's going to talk with us about her approach to education and the reforms we need today. So welcome, Anashay. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you so much for having me. Yes, I am Anashay Wright, but I would say when I taught years ago, my parents named me Teach 'em Right. You know, they would say, teach 'em right. And I say, okay, Anashay, teach 'em right. Why? And they say, well, because you don't teach them wrong, right? So I am Anashay Wright. Blessed to have the last name Wright. I say, even when I'm wrong, I'm still right. And so glad to be here. I am an educator. I am a mother. I am a wife. I am a national award-winning educator, speaker, and a disruptor of good across the K-12 system for over 2 decades now.
That's amazing. Well, welcome. The last name Sweet. I also say that no matter what happens, I still get to be sweet at the end of the day. So I am with you.
Man, yeah, that's it. How sweet it is, right?
Well, I taught middle school, so the first day of school, I taught the concept of irony. So that was I was like, really it's going to go either way. You choose. It's choose your own adventure. I can be very sweet, but I also cannot be. So you get to pick. Usually my kids let me stay sweet for the most part. So that was good.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about what Disruptive Partners does and what's your approach?
Absolutely. Disruptive Partners, it really was birthed out of me just being upset, right? Being a mother, I have 2 children. I'm in Metro Atlanta, Decatur, Georgia to be specific. I have a 10th grader who attends a predominantly Black Title I school. This is probably one of the most amazing schools ever. And my daughter who attends predominantly Black targeted Title I school in DeKalb County. I am also a proud graduate of the same county that my kids attend school in. And so when the pandemic hit, I felt a sense of sadness and disconnected because the DeKalb County I knew growing up, we were there for each other. You know, that's one thing that I've always loved about being in Metro Atlanta and predominantly Black communities is the sense of love, the sense of joy, the sense of collectiveness and community. And so I just got frustrated because I'm like, hey, what happened to the days where we would come together? You know, we would unite, we would look out, I'm my brother's keeper. And it was critically important for me because my mother became diagnosed with cancer when I was 15. Then at the age of 39, she passed. And so it was my educators, my church, my community. And so Disruptive Partners was birthed from this desire to really just partner and come together and just disrupt this foolishness, right? It was at the height of George Floyd. It was at a time when we had to sit down and be still. And it was time to disrupt the disconnection gap. And so I launched Disruptive Partners. The idea kind of came about in 2020 during the pandemic, and then 2021 is when we went full throttle. And I'm a social impact equity firm. I speak. I have designed a framework for good disruption across the K-12 system. And I'm on this mission to mass produce disruptive leaders at every level, starting at age 15.
I love that. So starting with high school students, having them become the disruptors, that's awesome. Yeah, and I appreciate also just the idea of needing to act in the moment of George Floyd and just I've said a lot that many of us, especially people who have been most impacted by the white supremacist system, there was no news or surprise for a lot of folks around what was happening with George Floyd. But I think what did happen is a lot of folks that maybe hadn't been as impacted by white supremacy or racism suddenly woke up. So there was an opportunity there that for me, I've been grateful for. I feel like I've been there and I've been like, come on, especially people who look like me and share my privilege, to get them to see the issues. And suddenly sitting at home in COVID and instance after instance after instance of violence against Black and brown people, primarily men, woke a lot of people up, which for me, I'm grateful for the wake up, heartbroken for the means by getting there.
Yeah, I think you said something powerful. Did I hear you say to get non-minority people to share their power or their privilege? Did I hear you say that?
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm so glad to hear you say that because I tell people diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? DEI are the most widely used 3-letter words in the K-12 system. But I'm like, I hope we don't DIE, trying to get it right. You know what I mean? Death to relationships, death to humanity, and what Disruptive Partners is about is actually moving from awareness to action, right? I'm not your bias training person by any sense of the word. It's like, okay, if you truly believe that these inequities exist, the racial wealth gap, the social injustice, then put your power, your influence, and your resources and follow our lead. And so that's why I want to make sure kids are ready. So when we say it's enough of the talk, right? Enough of the training and isolation and the shame and oppression Olympics, will you do what we ask you to do to ensure that we are equally and mutually powerful?
Oh, I love what you just said there. That's exactly, I 100% agree with you. I think often, actually I'm a board member, and I read into the board comments the other day, and I'm paraphrasing terribly right now, but in the letter from Birmingham jail, Martin Luther King wrote more than 50 years ago now, essentially that he was most concerned about so-called, white allies. He used a different term, but people who identified as allies, because actually it was really hard to get white allies to move. It's actually much easier and much less of a threat. People who are openly being racist, openly the KKK, he said in his quote, was like, less worried about them than actually these folks that are saying that there are allies who actually aren't putting their money where their mouth is. They're not actually standing up and supporting us. And so I am 100% with you that I think folks with power and privilege, our job, whether or not we think we do, and I often don't feel like I have a lot of power or privilege, and I have to understand it's all relative. And I have a lot more than a lot of people simply by the color of my skin. And I need to be able to use my power and privilege then to not speak for other people, is what I think often people think they're doing when they're being an ally, is speak for someone else, but actually make space at the table, get out of the way, or follow the lead of people of color who are identifying what needs to happen in the country, and use our privilege in that way. Much less risk for me to step forward than other folks because I have privilege, because I don't have as much risk every single day.
No, I think that is so important. And my framework is a 4-pronged framework, right? And the first step is self-disrupt. And that's where everybody owns their own disruption, right? Instead of waiting for the facilitator or the training. And is grounded on one question. What is the story you're telling yourself about the power you have, about the power, you don't have, right? And about what you truly believe about Black people, right? And, and it's like, and that's your story to own in its honesty, right? In all of it. And that's where the self-disruption starts with you, because the first leader is self-leadership, right? But to master self-leadership, you have to master the art and the science and the feng shui, for lack of a better word, of self-disruption. So no one else has to do it for you. And I think there's a lot of talk around, okay, well, hey, let's follow the lead. But where Disruptive Partners comes in is that we create an executive leadership experience for those most proximate to the problem, so that we are prepared to engage like a boss, engage like a CEO, to question like a CEO, right? To strategize, to create, to lead. And so that's, and CEO stands for community, education, and organization leaders, meaning the kids in your classroom today are your future CEOs. I mean, if you truly care about our community and the racial wealth gap, I got to ask, why do we only have 5 Black CEOs of Fortune 500 companies? Right? I got to ask, why? How come we've never had a Black Supreme Court justice that is a female? So you would have to put us in the positions and places that matter most, including our own businesses, right, for us to truly disrupt in a way that benefits humanity.
Yeah, I wrote a book a few years ago now. I'm actually going to revisit it and put out a new version and have a workbook that goes along with it that talks exactly what you're talking about, which is you have to start with yourself first. So I have a framework that goes to the self-work schoolwork cycle, but you have to start with yourself and have a willingness to look at yourself and take an honest assessment about what is true and isn't true about yourself, your privilege, your power, your biases, and how you're showing up in classrooms and schools. And really for all of us, but as a white educator myself and a white female educator, and we're the largest group of people in education, it is crucial that white female educators take a look at ourselves and be honest about the biases that we have. I think there's so much shame about that. There's so much fear about acknowledging that we have biases or that we might be not 100% clear in our perspective or 100% equal in our perspective, that then people won't even look at it for themselves and they push it away and hide behind that. And if you don't own your story, you're not willing to look at yourself and willing to be vulnerable,
that's right,
at least to yourself, if not to people who are going to support you to be different, then there's really, to me, it's a non-starter after that point, because if you're not willing to say it and work with yourself, then it's all going to continue to be very surface level changes to wherever you're trying to work.
Absolutely. And I have to give a shout out to my African-centered community. We call them our JEGNAs, our respected advisors. Shout out to Aya Academy in Metro Atlanta. Shout out to Kilombo and Kibole Bole. My husband and I have done a lot of training. Our kids started really deeply engaging with the African-centered community. And so when we talk about our joy, peace, and power, the whole premise, oh goodness, I'm wondering, here's my book right here, Baba Amos Wilson. I don't see how people can get into the classroom and not understand Baba Wilson. The whole premise is that the Black community is one of the most powerful, powerless communities. And it's because we don't know the power that we already have. We don't need to be empowered by anybody because we are already powerful.
Right.
And we're simply asking for, my kids know, we don't want an invitation to whack tables, right? Tables with broke legs, those tables haven't served us well. We actually want to be the architects. We want to invite you to our table, and so that's and that's where we level the playing field. We've come to all the other tables long enough, come to ours. Yep. Bring your car, bring your platinum credit card, bring your keys and hop in the back seat, right? We're not saying you can't ride, but you just can't drive. And that's what's been happening, is that people have been trying to drive our change in our communities, right? Instead of making sure we're equipped to do it ourselves.
Absolutely. That's right. And it's never going to be a complete solution if we're driving for someone else and telling someone else what to do. I mean, that was kind of almost exactly going back to Martin Luther King's quote. His point is you're telling us, you're controlling the playing field, then you're inviting us to this small little, you already decided what the rules are and how everything's going to go, and now you're gonna let us play. That's not quite the way it works. It's not going to give us an opportunity to actually lead in the way that's going to be true and most important for us. 100% agree with you. I can't imagine a better way of transforming our education. And I love that you're talking about starting with our youth, because they are, I've been at a high school for the last couple months, and the kids are so powerful. They're so intentional, and they know so much more than we did when we were their age. Their world, their experience is different.
Yes.
So what do your youth programs look like when you're working with 15-year-olds? What's an example of
Yeah, we launch our Real CEO Leadership Accelerator March 26th. So we are pumped. I can remember it like it was yesterday. My son, he's 15, he'll be 16 soon. He said, Mom, I believe someone asked him, how is instruction looking in the age of COVID, virtually, and it's something watered down, and they weren't prepared for his response. Because we raise our kids to know the power they have, that can be used for good, but also, not good. And he says, listen, he said, Mom, let's be real. Or, he said, let's be real. I need $1 million education. I need $1 million connections. I need $1 million resources to create $1 million impact. And he was 14 when he said it to me, he'll be 16, but it really just sparked. I was like, you know what, you're right. If you never went to college, and this whole false notion of college and career readiness, I'm like, no, what about CEO readiness? You know what I'm saying? What about, we don't want to be job seekers. We want to be job creators, right? We want to be industry leaders. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, what do I need to give my son now that they have at these Ivy League schools, while still being deeply in love with our community, right? Not shaming our community. And that's where the Real CEO Accelerator came from. It is an 8-week experience where we take students starting at age 15, predominantly Black students, and we create an 8-week experience. We bring 3 critical groups in the K-12 system. We bring Black families, we bring educators, and then we bring executive leaders together. And over that course of 8 weeks, they'll engage in a training with our framework that takes them from self-disruptive leaders to collective leaders to disruptive leaders. And at the end of that experience, right, they will leave with their, number one, able to engage and articulate, what makes them powerful leaders. They'll have a 1-pager overview. They'll have their pitch deck. And the powerful part is we're asking our white co-conspirators, and our white disruptive partners to come give 8 hours, like volunteer for 8 hours and serve as an executive coach or a partner to our students. And you take the lead in taking their words that they orally articulate and turning it into something usable, nice. Right? We're not shaming anybody. We're saying, hey, one thing we notice is that when we think about the tenets of dominant white culture, right? Worship of the written word is a thing. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I don't have a problem with written word when you're writing the word that I tell you to write. You know what I'm saying? I don't have a problem with it. But traditionally, as a Black people or people, indigenous people, we are oral storytellers. So if my white co-conspirator can transcribe what I say orally and turn it into a format that speaks to their white community, right? Like I didn't come from that community. That's it. And then we just coach the kids how to engage, how to communicate like a boss, right? How to connect and how to lead. And so at the end of that 8-week experience, we set them up to engage with these CEOs to see if they would invest in them as leaders. Oh, and so that is what the accelerator is, right? So right now, I work, full time, and then I have this is my baby, this is my passion project, because I always said I don't mix my paycheck with my passion, it gets murky. So this is it. My son and I it does. Yeah, it does. So my son and I co-created the Real CEO program together. Oh, and he's a paid keynote speaker as well.
Go ahead, Mom. That's amazing. I have a 13-year-old. I can't get him to do homework. So the fact that you guys have created a program together, I'll just need some parenting tips because we're literally at could just do your homework on time. So that's amazing. That's incredible. Yeah. So is this going to be
I think we have to disrupt I think we have to disrupt the way we think about designing. Ed reform and education has this needs to be, like COVID. I say COVID was both a disruptor and an accelerator of change. Some of the stuff I look at and I'm like, okay, well, when I say co-created, I simply listen and codify what he says, right? It's his knowledge and his lived experience. So I honor and respect his closeness to the K-12 system, right? And actually ask him the same way that I ask a doctor or a lawyer. And what he says, I codify it, and I bring my team. And he owns those words, right? I will never colonize my children's truth. I actually believe they're smart enough to give viable solutions if we actually listen. So I think, co-creating, we got to disrupt what we've been told and sold, all of us, right? The system hurts all of us. Mm-hmm. And it really hurts white people or people who are centered in whiteness, right? Because they ain't all white. But people who are centered in white ideology, it hurts them worse because they actually believed in a system that was never going to serve them well anyway. Mm-hmm. Like I was raised to know there were boundaries. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think what you're saying is so powerful. And as a career educator, it's something I've been talking with lots of people about, which is, our old system, the one that we're still living with, was created almost 200 years ago, a long time ago, for entirely different conditions,
right,
different
and outcomes,
different outcomes, different intended outcomes, and many of us were not welcome at the table. It was really only built for a small subset of people within this country, and yet we continue, and we have so much. We're so entrenched in it that we can't see how much it's actually getting in our way of being successful. And it's one of the things that makes me most hopeful about the pandemic is that the systems, it's showing the weaknesses within this system. It's showing how much it's failing our kids and not able to meet them where they need to be. And it gives me so much hope that we can actually reimagine education in a new way and see it really differently. I mean, kids are learning so differently now, even than when I was a teacher 30 years ago. Like the way they learn, the way they approach life is so different.
Yes.
And they are much more empowered. They're much more savvy. They're much more aware. Why are we trying to continue to have them do work and do things that don't fit with where they're at now, let alone that are still representing racist ideologies built in a white supremacist system that's not supporting our students.
Yes. That you just said it. Yeah, you said it. And it's like, I'm also grateful that it started to embolden, and shout out to my friend, my brother from another mother, Jonathan Santos Silva. But, he always says, like, it's not about empowering. You can't give me power. You can't empower my children. They've already been powerful, right? You can embolden them and you can equip them. And that's what I'm saying. It's actually emboldened us, right, as a people, as a Black people, to do something different and to be fearless, right? With strategy. I mean, you got to be strategic, but I'm just grateful that, all great civil rights movement begins with people saying no, right? And I teach my kid there is so much power in no. And that, so anyway, I appreciate you saying that, because it did something to both of us, right? It was a disruptor of good, disruptor of not good. My heart goes out to the lives lost, including those people close to me, right? It's tragic. And at the same way, hurt has a way of accelerating us to do something different and to change.
Well, and we have a shared experience and a shared suffering that I don't know if we've had as a country before, right? So while COVID has absolutely, and I do not want to cut this short at all, absolutely has much more profoundly impacted our Black and brown communities, underprivileged communities that haven't had historical access to healthcare and other opportunities that then have allowed COVID to come in and hit harder and be more devastating than our more affluent and privileged communities. So I just want to be very clear. We have not gone through COVID the same. However, we have a set of shared experiences now, and are seeing how so many of our structures are falling apart and they're not working for anyone anymore. And it's just time for us to change them. And I love that you have such a powerful framework for supporting our students to do that. And for bringing people together across sector and across age and across identity to have those conversations, because I think that's also was so crucial. There's so much fear around connecting and acknowledging our issues, but when you have facilitated conversations where folks are together talking and working towards something, then I think it takes those barriers and makes them go away so quickly. So that's really exciting for me. Yeah, and I'm loving the hat. So I'm going to have to buy a hat. So I'm hoping you have like a website with some places we can buy some things.
Yeah, I am. I will send you the link. It will be ready. I have a new web designer, so he's making some upgrades because I have a big keynote speech to do on Saturday to you, in front of you. So I will have it ready. And I'm working on it. This thing blew up quicker. I mean, we were able to generate $1 million impact last year in our first year.
Wow.
Yeah. So $1 million impact means we brought right around $750,000 to our clients and communities and schools, right, who were disrupting, ranging from creating learning hubs, shout out to the DeKalb County schools, all the way to working with alternative schools, right? And so that's a big part of what we do, is strategize and support our clients in securing revenue. for programs that do that. I used to teach in an alternative school, and I designed a program there back in 2019. And then another big way we generate revenue is my public speaking. I do a lot of university equity panels. I do a lot of paid keynotes, paid speeches. And then the final part, of course, is leadership development. So combined in our first full year, we generated $1 million in impact revenue and resources for Black communities and schools.
That is amazing. That is, you must be incredibly proud. What an impact and a lasting impact in your community. One of our other guests we had last year, it was kind of referencing that same like just unbelievable blow up of what started as a simple idea. And if you haven't heard of them, I think you would probably vibe with them really well. It's called A Long Talk. And it came out of a father who was a former teacher who saw his son having really combative conversations with a teammate on his son was in college about the George Floyd case and what had happened there. And his son was African-American, the teammate was white, and these race issues just blew up right in front of his eyes. They were teammates, everything was all good. And then suddenly this moment happened that became really polarizing for a lot of folks. And so he literally just started, he reached out to the coach and just started facilitating conversations about race, especially in athletics. And so he's going around the country. So really similar to you, an educator who was like, look, I know how to create a lesson. I know how to bring people together. I know how to facilitate. And I have an idea that's going to be really impactful in this moment and disrupt the moment. So he would be a great person. Their organization would be a great organization for you to connect with.
Yeah.
And it's just
I would love to. Yeah. I mean, we can't do this work alone. And that's why I was intentional about putting partners in our names, right? Real partners, though. We're not looking for performative people, right? We're looking for people who really want to partner in mutually powerful ways and mutually beneficial ways. So yeah, I'm all about real, authentic partnerships that actually move us from awareness of a problem to action. So absolutely.
Well, what kind of partners are you looking for? Because it would be good for us to kind of let people know how to find you, and also if they want to help you. I mean, I'm ready to sign up to be a partner if you need someone like me.
Let me tell you, Megan, I'm so proud of you, sis. Let me tell you what I need. I need 10 co-conspirators, right, that will volunteer their time actually 6 where we're at now. 6, I need 6 co-conspirators like yourself that are willing to serve as coaches, like writing communication coaches, and not articulating, right? Our kids don't need to be coached, quite honestly, right? But we need leadership support in creating their one-pagers and their pitch decks, right? So we're looking for people. The ask is between the month of April, from April the 1st to May 15th. We're simply asking to volunteer 8 hours to work side by side with 2 of our real CEOs to create their leadership pitch. And I think that's the biggest thing. And then always looking for people to sponsor a real CEO for our program. But the bigger thing are people who would actually share their skills and their knowledge with these students and form real, authentic relationships. My son, shout out to Dan Weisberg. Dan Weisberg used to be the CEO of an organization called the New Teacher Project, TNTP. And I worked for them for about 8 years. And Dan, as a white male, I think he's now the deputy chancellor for New York Department of Ed, but my son met him in 9. And my son calls him Uncle Dan because someone as powerful as him didn't try to save my son from himself, right? Or didn't see us as a sympathy case. He takes every opportunity that he can to share his power, his influence, to set my son up to speak on national stages, right? And to connect him. So there's just so much power in honoring the humanity of us all. And I think that's the final thing I want to say about anybody that supports the Disruptive Partners movement. We're about creating inclusive, humanizing spaces, right, that are mutually powerful, right? So we don't do the shame, oppression Olympics. I mean, that DEI training, I would go into DEI being cool with people who were white, mostly white women, and leave feeling traumatized because I was one of 2 chocolate chip cookies and chocolate chips in a cookie, restating my pain. Then I started to not like people who I cared about going into it, right? And nothing got solved. Yep. So if you're looking for your bias training where you go on some framework to the Oppression Olympics and stuff, like that's not for us. But if you know that you have a skill for writing, if you know that you can help kids unpack their truth, and if you truly want to have authentic relationships with the members of my community, I am asking them to sign up today, disruptivepartners.org/real CEOs. I'll have the link. I already have the link shared in the materials you asked for earlier. All we're asking for is 8 hours, over the course of 8 weeks, to partner intimately with Black youth in powerful ways.
Well, you've got me for sure. So I will for sure sign up, and I will put it everywhere.
Yay! My girl.
And I love what you're saying, because I always hesitate as a white identified person to be like, DEI trainings aren't like where it's at, but DEI trainings aren't where it's at so often because they are exactly what you described. There's spaces where people of color are put in a place of having to hold the space for people that are waking up to their privilege, and that's absolutely not appropriate. It's not safe. And one-day trainings is not going to ever solve the problem. I became aware of white privilege as 21-year-old when I started my teacher training program. I grew up in the Bay Area, fairly well, went to Malcolm X elementary school. So, we all thought that we had it together, but I didn't understand about race and privilege and power until I went to teacher school. And I've been working at it for 27 years, and I would be the first person to tell you that I do not know what I'm talking about. I still have something to learn. I've been working at it for 27 years to understand my own privilege and how that shows up, and learn how to unpack how race shows up in all of our lives. But that's a daily exercise. It's not a one day and done, and now we're ready to hold hands. So I think those trainings are only supported if they are prolonged, if there's a long road, like on-ramp to getting to that training, that involves a lot of what you're talking about, self-disruption.
Yeah, Megan, we're educators, right? I'm a certified educator still. I'm certified in K-5. I'm certified in middle grade ELA as far as K-12 SPED as well. And sis, here's my thing, man. Like, and I know that a good thinking experience, right? Not learning. Learning to me is too dependent and compliant upon inputs, right? Teacher gives you something, you learn it. No, a deep thinking experience, right? A deep learning experience, right, is one where you practice, right? You get a few minutes of content and you don't over intellectualize. I don't see you would have to practice these things from the training, right? You have to practice it. So we over intellectualize stuff because it feels safe. And it's not doing anything but using dollars and money. I want to see, can you engage with Black youth, right, from a lens of equity? Can we increase and diversify the CEO executive leadership pipeline, right? And can you include children in their own change? That's diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So it's like, we know good and darn well, no instructional, no real thinking, learning experience is going to ever be sit and get. And if it is, like my son say, if you're not teaching me how to make $1 million, you ain't teaching.
Yeah, you're totally, I 100% with you. And
so we're on the same page. I just appreciate you saying that.
No, I will. This conversation has been wonderful. We'll make sure people know how to find you. I'm so glad that we got to connect through the School Stories experience. Hopefully you're going to be able to get your story out there. And I will absolutely put the link that you share with me on my website and out on social media in advance of the show going live. And I will put my name on that list. I would love to work with one of your youth and help them to tell their story, or help them to capture their story in the way that is most meaningful to them. So.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much. I promise we'll make it as painless as possible. It's
they're going to be
virtual.
annoyed by me because, I'm as painless as possible. I think I'm still cool. And, being 50, I have to realize that I'm not so cool anymore.
Oh.
So really, they're going to have to tolerate me. But I'm going to have a fun time for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for your service, in this movement, right? In education, right? I could never pull this together. That's not my calling, like get it all codified and stuff. I'm like, no, but thank you for your service. And make sure you take care of you. That's the last thing I will say. Yeah. Please pause and take care of you and surround yourself around people who will sow back into you the way that you're sowing into others.
Yeah, that means so much. And I 100% agree. This has been so wonderful, Anashay. Thank you for joining us today. And we'll be in touch.
Sounds good. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed Anashay's energy as much as I did. She's a really powerful advocate and an inspiring leader. So I'm so appreciative of her and the work that Disrupt Education is doing to disrupt the inequities that we have in our country. And I'm really grateful for that. Up next, we'll be talking with someone who's brought mindfulness together with nature, and they're doing it in Africa. Before we go to our next guest, I did want to invite you all to go to my website, www.your3eyes.com. That's YOUR3EYES.com. There you can learn more about the School Stories Project and also gain access to the course that I've created on Teachable, all about how to create school stories. So if you want to learn about storytelling and its role in education, which is a pretty cool and exciting one, I'd love for you to visit our website. There's also going to be a white paper coming out that describes the research of storytelling in education and lots of more information around that. I also give talks on it. So please check out my website, www.your3eyes.com, to learn more about all the work that I do and specifically around the power of storytelling in education. Thanks, everyone.
Everyone, and welcome to part 2 of our School Stories episode. I'm really excited to introduce Smriti Sharma, who is another one of our grantees, and I'll let her introduce herself. So Smriti, can you tell everyone a little bit about yourself, where you're calling in from?
Yes, thank you, Megan. So I'm calling in from Nairobi, Kenya, and you reached out to me via LinkedIn and told me about what you're doing, and I applied, and I really, really appreciate the opportunity to have participated in the op-ed writing project because it was so useful and it really shaped my thoughts. And I proceeded to write an article that did get published in January in the biggest newspaper here in Kenya called The Daily Nation. So it was about basically mindfulness in education and why it's needed. And it was talking a lot about Corona and how it affected children's mental health and well-being. And before Corona, mental health and well-being were mainly put on the sidelines. But then because of the pandemic, it really got to front and center stage. So I felt that it was really well received because I've been trying to talk about mindfulness in education prior to this, and it was quite difficult to get traction, but it's been much easier now to do that. And I wrote about what my business partner and friend Alima Noor Mohammed and I are doing. We basically set up a company called Nurture in Nature, and we teach mindfulness to children in forest settings or in natural settings in school compounds. And it's actually, we found that, we set it up during just last year, and it was very well received because a lot of children were still studying from home. So the opportunity to get out and socialize with other kids was really taken up. And now that schools have started back in person, we've actually got 4 international schools here in Nairobi that are participating. And so we don't do it in the classroom, but we do it outside. And we have courses that run over 8 to 10 weeks, like once a week, about 45 minutes to an hour each session.
That's really exciting. I mean, there's so much for us to unpack here. And I don't know if you knew that I was the senior director at Mindful Schools for a bit. And Mindful Schools, similar to you, the goal is to bring mindfulness programming into schools. And just like you, I think before the pandemic, we were always kind of on the outside looking in. There were a few schools that were willing to take up the time to do mindfulness in school, or to recognize social emotional learning and why that was important. But it was a minority. And I definitely feel like, and I'm a district insider who's worked in school districts for a long time, I could understand like the hesitancy, because I'd also watched it on the ground as a district leader, watching people kind of debate the value of mindfulness versus just focusing on academics. And as soon as the pandemic hit, then suddenly our work at Mindful Schools went up a big tick as well. And suddenly people were looking to us and asking for us. And we got to a point where we almost had more business than we knew what to do with. Because
that's amazing.
Yeah, because people suddenly realized why mindfulness is important. So it's such a unfortunate, a positive outcome, but from an unfortunate starting point, which is just the trauma of the pandemic, and it's still going on. And so I'm excited to hear that you still have folks at your that are allowing you to come in and provide that training to students, because that's so important. Can you explain a little bit? And my colleague, she'll be sad to miss this, because she's actually getting special certification to do therapy in forest settings. And in my book, I wrote a book called Educator's Guide for Using Your Three Eyes. And I talk specifically about the benefits of being in nature and connecting that with mindfulness practices. So I'm wondering how you came to that combination, and what does that look like when you're working with students in the forest doing mindfulness, or in nature?
Okay, so actually that was my colleague's idea, Alima, because she's a big hiker and nature fan, and I mean I hike too, but it wasn't I give credit to her for that, because she's also trained as a life coach, and she does her coaching sessions for adults in the forest, and she finds it just so much more beneficial doing it in that setting than in an office or home setting. So that's all credit to her. And I think that, so since we started doing that, I've of course tried to learn more myself about forest schools and activities that we can do in nature. So basically, first of all, nature just calms us down naturally. I mean, it just has this grounding effect anyway. And I feel that you feel that there's much more space and you can breathe and just be. And I think that children really get that. And what I can say, because my background is school, so I can definitely say that when you take them out of a classroom setting to one like that, they feel much more freer. They feel there's a lot of anxiety and edge already taken off just by being out there. So the kind of sessions that we do it's mainly so one of the things that we do is, for example, grounding, where you walk barefoot in nature, and we do like silent meditation walks of noticing what you can see and making nature mandalas. So that's a big element of the nature part of what happens when we're out there. But then a lot of it is just the straight up mindfulness practices, except just done outside. And I think because it's in a natural setting, things like being much more aware of your senses, like the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 meditation of senses, is much more interesting out in nature than it would be in a classroom. And the kids just seem much more happier and have fun. I mean, they just, they're endlessly fascinated. I mean, our target age group has been 9 to 12-year-olds so far, but we're going to expand. But you find that you don't really need to do much. There's just so much fodder for the imagination, just being out there. And of course, being in Africa, sometimes we have monkeys in the forest, and they're just fascinated by it, and what birds they can spot.
Oh, that's so amazing. That sounds I'm so jealous. I just want to go and do your class out there. And you're right. I mean, I think kids are so naturally curious, and to provide them this opportunity to be able to be in nature, I think is so huge. Where we live in California, in the Bay Area, we have kids who have never been in nature at all. I mean, their version of nature is a tree, on the sidewalk. but they don't have that opportunity to really get out. And so we have a lot of programs that are dedicated to bringing kids, especially those that are in the inner city, to nature, because it's so important. So I love that you're doing that, and the mindfulness practices are so important. Because, you know, kids aren't through the pandemic yet. It's one of the things I talk about a lot. I'm a school board member here, and school board, I don't know what the corollary would be where you are, but it's a group of people that we make decisions on the how to run a school district. It's an elected position, and I keep kind of warning all the families who are so anxious about getting the kids back to normal and understanding what normal is and recovering from the pandemic. That number one, you know, I've said many times, and it feels like a wet blanket, I guess, but I'm just trying to be realistic. You know, like we're not going to be out of the woods right away. There's no magic bullet that's going to make this situation undo itself.
Yes.
So, you know, at first it was coming back to school again and not being in quarantine. And I was like, okay, coming back to school, sure, there's going to be some benefits there, but it's not going to be all that you thought it would be. And lo and behold, it wasn't. And so now it's getting rid of the masks. If we get rid of the masks and kids can breathe again, then everything's going to be better. I'm like, no, we're all collectively traumatized. You know, we've had 2 years of intensive trauma. It's not going to go away with anything. One of the things that Susan and I have been talking about this year is just wondering with all of our guests, what do you think will get us through the other side? Or what are some things that you can imagine would support us as we continue to navigate the pandemic?
Well, as you said, as you mentioned earlier, the big focus on social emotional learning and trying to get this message across to a wider audience and keeping it front and center. I think let's not forget, like, as you said, let's not just focus on it now and then go back to business as usual. I mean, one of the things that actually shocked me was when school did start again, it felt like we'd lost the lessons that we learned. It felt like, you know, when we were doing virtual learning, a lot of things dropped. So when school started again, it felt like, let's go full tilt, 100 miles per hour, because we didn't have a Christmas play. We're going to make this the best Christmas play ever because it's been 2 years. And that pressure, I can tell you, that pressure that teachers felt and children felt, it was palpable. You know, I almost was like, what did we learn, people? Like, I think we just have to refocus on unnecessary stress that happens in school, like slim down, focus on what matters. And I think the social emotional learning part, the fact that a light has been shined on it, I think it needs to stay front and center stage, like, and be integrated into the whole curriculum. And you had mentioned mindful schools, and it's just really amazing how things work, because recently I got in touch with a group of Kenyan women psychologists who are doing something with mindful self-compassion, and they're going to apparently do it in partnership with mindful schools, of bringing it into schools in Kenya through the 47 counties. Because what we've been doing, what Alima and I have been doing, I have to admit, has been mainly focusing on the private schools, right? Because that's where it's been easier as an in, right? So like the British curriculum schools and International School Kenya, which is American and Canadian. But I am very aware and conscious that it shouldn't just be for privileged families and children. And so this project that I think mindful schools are also going to be involved in, it's really fascinating and great, because they want to train one teacher counselor per county, and there are 47 counties, to start spreading the word in the government schools in Kenya. So that is a real big positive change.
Yeah, that's huge. That's really exciting. And I love that the focus is on the self-compassion part as well, which I think is such an important element of mindfulness that we don't always get to. So I think when people think about mindfulness, myself even, and I've taught mindfulness and worked at mindful schools for quite a while, you know, I kind of go to the meditation part of it. But I think the other part of mindfulness is really important, which is just knowing and honoring your feelings, and then meeting yourself with compassion, which is what mindful self-compassion is. So rather than judging yourself or being hard on yourself, just having compassion for the feelings that you have. And I mean, boy, if ever there was a time for self-compassion, it's now. I'm super excited to hear that the mindfulness and self-compassion is being brought to non-private schools in Africa, and that we're training the adults to bring it forward. That's a really exciting option. And yeah,
it
so
really
important.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and so I think, these sorts of things is what will get us through to the other side. And opening up the conversation about this sort of thing, because I mean, even pre-pandemic, there's been a weird phenomenon here in Kenya where a lot of young men, especially, there's a high rate of suicide amongst young men in between 18 and 25, because emotions are just not talked about. Culturally speaking, emotions are just not talked about, right? So this sort of thing, opening up just space for conversation, even that is going to have a massive impact.
Yeah. Oh, that's exciting. That's so important. Yeah, I think touching in on our feelings. I'm working as a school principal right now, just to kind of help out one of my clients. And I'm seeing that every day. I mean, teenagers' emotions are always somewhat high, right? There's a lot going on. But it's really profound just how frustrated kids are, how much they want to give up. And kids in this age have lost a lot. I have a son at home as well, and they've lost core parts of their childhood and their development that they're not going to be able to get back. And it's going to make them different, right? They're not going to have this, and they're going to have something else. And kids in societies have moved through lots of terrible things. I imagine kids during wartime, similar, right? Like lots of the kid things that we imagined don't happen for them. But there is this loss there, and we haven't been able to develop the kids. When those typical experiences are gone, I think the onus is on us to help them to develop some coping mechanisms, to learn how to work with their feelings, and maybe even we'll have kids coming out on the other side that, while maybe academically they won't have the same strengths as they had before, they won't have some of those same cultural experiences, whatever those are, based on wherever we are in the world, they will have a greater understanding of themselves, a grounding in mindfulness, and a grounding in that compassion, and just better touch with their feelings, which I think would be huge. The other question, Susan, I've been asking everybody, and we're almost already out of time, it's amazing, is like, as we think about looking forward to the next iteration of education, because I firmly believe that what we've been doing needs to stop, and we got to change it. So what's some ideas you have, or an idea you have around what the next iteration of education could look like? And you could talk about changes in school day, changes in curriculum, but have you done any thinking on, like, what do we need to bring forward into the next version of our education system for our kids?
That's such an interesting question. And I'd love to, actually, I need to listen to your podcast to see what your thoughts are and other people's thoughts on this. So actually, I mean, it's already been happening, but I really love the idea of forest schools. And I feel that something like that has not really happened here in Nairobi. There is one school that was attempting it, but it's a little bit difficult when you're really the only one going against the grain, so to speak. But I think things like that, like just being more out in nature, forest schools, integrating learning that is much more practical and relevant. I mean, my background is I'm a Montessori trained person, teacher. Then I went into the mainstream. So I prefer I veer towards the alternative. I'm interested in Reggio Emilia, Waldorf, all these sorts of things. But I think that even with a lot of these alternative systems, like even with Montessori, people can tend to get a little bit fundamental. Like you can get Montessori fundamentalists. So I think always keeping this idea of experimentation, of course, within reason. I mean, we're not really going to experiment on kids, but you know what I mean? Like keeping a fresh sort of Zen beginner's mind to what matters here, like what is the learning outcome, and just trying different methods, because we all know children learn differently. But I think, there has to be structure, but I think a loosening of the structure, because I've mainly worked at British curriculum schools, and they're very, very specific, like too controlling, there's not that much room for creativity and maneuver. So I think freeing up space for that. Another educator that really inspires me is J.D. Krishnamurti.
Never
heard of him?
Mm-mm.
Oh, you've never heard of him? So he was an Indian educator, and there are some Krishnamurti schools in the world. And again, that was more like values-based education, and a bit more alternative and in touch with practical realities of kids doing more stuff rather than just being vessels,
Mm-hmm.
like have them involved in projects, have them involved in what can we do for the environment, like, more practical things.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
Mm.
that's really, really interesting. Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I'm a traditional traditional educator, so teacher and school and district administrator, and I understand why we have so many of the structures that we do and why bureaucracies are needed. Like, I get it on an intellectual level. But I'm with you in that I think we actually need to really rethink a lot of those structures now and be different. Our kids learn differently. They learned differently before the pandemic. I mean, because their orientation towards technology and information is so different than those of us who are teaching them. None of us, even unless you're like in your early 20s, we can't really relate to the learning experience, because even like our 30-year-old teachers, they didn't grow up with the kind of access to information and technology that our kids do now. Like, it's just changing so quickly. And they just
Exactly.
orient differently. I mean, it's been such an interesting thing to be in the high school, and the kids are so fast on technology, and they're emailing, and they are just interacted and plugged in the world in a way that we aren't. So I would love to see some of the experimentation and different options for learning that were available during the pandemic, or that were tried out to be made available. And I would love to see, just like you, a loosening of some of those structures, because I think learning is going to look different moving forward. Kids are just really oriented differently. Many of them aren't necessarily thinking about college, because they don't necessarily have to do that to be successful in what they're interested in. So it's a really interesting time. And I'm hoping that we can find some ways to loosen the structures in our schools, and definitely bring more focus on joy and lightness and some happiness. So anyway, that's a lot of what I end up talking about. So.
And I think Tori, I haven't been asked that question as we're speaking. I think what would be also really good is, we talk a lot about being democratic, but I think maybe what should happen is really involving children themselves and young people who've maybe just finished school to, like, actually, what can we do to change? Because as you said, we can't really think of it, because I mean, I'm in my 40s, and I didn't even know what cancel culture was until a colleague teacher had to explain it to me, because it's not my world. So actually, like, involving young people more in asking them, what would work for you? What do you think needs to change?
Yes, Smriti, that's my op-ed article that I keep putting on the back burner, but as we're talking, it reminds me. I absolutely think that's true. I mean, that's part of what I think is important about telling our stories, and why I was interested in doing this school stories work is these nuanced stories are so important, and they get lost in the big picture generalizations with data and a lot of the ways we end up talking about or looking at and thinking about schools. And what we need to do is unearth the stories that will exemplify and make real some of the issues that we have in schools, and absolutely use the stories of our youth and ask them directly what our education system needs to be in the future, because they are far better prepared to identify what we need than we are. Because I'll be 50 in a few months. Like, I'm a dinosaur. Like, I just don't think like that. So yeah, I don't get it either. So I think it's just so crucial. And you're inspiring me to finally get that op-ed article written. So well, it's such a pleasure to have you on this show, and such an honor to have you in the op-ed project. And I'm so excited for you that your article was published. Could you email a link to me, and we'll put it on the website?
Yes. I think, did I not share it with you already?
You might
if
have,
I haven't,
but
I'll
if you could do it again, that would be great. Because I am not always good with email. But thank you so much for being on the show. And if folks want to connect with you and learn more about the work that you do, how can they find you?
So they can, what I can do is I'll also share our email with you.
Okay, great.
As well. So, and we also have a Twitter, not Twitter, Instagram handle, Nurture Nature 22. And I hope that, I would love to hear from people who are doing similar work and share ideas and best practice.
Wonderful. I will definitely pass those things along. Smriti, thank you so much for being with us today. It's been such an honor. And again, so great that your article got published. That's really exciting.
Thank you so much, Megan.
Class is dismissed. Wasn't that fun? Susan and Megan are always happy to greet you on the next episode of The Awakening Educator. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Education is the foundation for a brighter future. Open your eyes to The Awakening Educator.